Hey y'all, Patrick James, Cold Dead Hands, Black Coffee Perspectives, and Into the Fray.
With John Double Tap Britton, Midnight Munchies, Food for Thought, Cold Dead Hands, and Into the Fray.
So what's up for our topic today, John?
Well, today is one of my personal favorites, which means I'm probably not going to let Pat get much of a word in edgewise.
Oh, but you know me. I will get my words in edgewise.
Today we're going to talk about the Electoral College.
Gosh. Topics that kind of bore me.
But it should not bore you.
Because they're tedious.
And
the only thing that makes them tedious are politicians.
And the Electoral College is really not that tedious. People overcomplicate it and misrepresent it.
Politicians overcomplicate, misrepresent, and then everybody else falls in there, and it's like, well, that's a lot more complicated. Constitutional scholars spend hours and hours debating about the Electoral College. Can we simplify it?
Oh, yeah.
Let's do that.
Okay. Now, first of all, to understand the Electoral College, you really need to understand our form of government. Now, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today because we'll do a whole nother video on republic versus democracy, what America is, why it was set up that way. But for the sake of understanding the Electoral College, you have to understand that the United States is a Federalist Constitutional Republic. Each one of those words has a meaning.
Absolutely.
Federalism basically is a collection of independent governments. In our case, independent states. The states came together and created the federal government.
Is that similar to the EU and its model?
Similar, I mean, federation, confederation, federalism, it's a collection of independents that have a common shared goal.
Right.
But
So,
the key point there, before we get too far into the weeds, is it's a collection of independents.
Independent, states, united, those were all words that were crafted specifically.
Exactly.
But we could look at them as individual countries.
Yeah. But the first step to understanding the Electoral College is that the states themselves are independent, sovereign entities.
Like a country. Similar.
And federalism is them coming together to create the federal government.
Agreeing
on a set of constitutionally outlined powers that federal government would exercise in their place. Which is why you have the separation of powers between the federal government and the states. So understanding that the states themselves are sovereign entities is the first step to understanding the Electoral College.
Yep.
Now the second step, federal, constitutional, republic. Republic is basically representative government.
I didn't hear democracy in that.
And you won't find democracy anywhere in any of our founding documents.
What? We see it comes across the frickin' TV every other day. Our democracy.
And that's part of the problem.
It comes out of the mouths of politicians who are running for high offices.
Now, we do have a democratic House of Representatives.
There you go.
That is the only one person, one vote democracy in America. When you elect your representative to the House of Representatives.
There you go.
Well,
that simplifies it to a degree.
Well, let me back up for a second, because you do vote directly for your senators now, thanks to the 17th Amendment, but that's not how it was intended, because the Senate serves a different purpose. It represents the state. Remember, that independent, sovereign state that created the federal government. Not the people, the state.
So we were led astray once again by politicians when the 17th Amendment was ratified.
The 17th Amendment, prior to the 17th Amendment, senators were appointed by the state legislatures to protect state interests. Now, there's a lot of reasons why the 17th Amendment was passed. There was some good old boy network stuff. There was some, backroom shady deals. So, despite the fact that there was a reason for the 17th Amendment, does not justify the 17th Amendment because it was a bad idea and began the democratization of America. But, again,
another rabbit hole for another video in another time and place.
The point being that of all of this initial rabbit holing is to reinforce the point that states have a say in the matter.
As they should.
So, when you get into the Electoral College, well, let's just go to the national popular vote movement that's going on right now. One of the examples that they like to throw out there to bolster their case is they like to compare California and Wyoming.
I've heard that.
Now, for the record, California is the most populous state in our country. They have a little over 37 million people in California. At least as of the 2010 census numbers. I'm sure that may have dropped with the middle class mass exodus out of California. But 2010 numbers, they had 37.2 million people. Wyoming had 563,626 people.
That's a significant difference.
So what they do is they take the electors of California, which is 55, that go to the Electoral College. Wyoming has 3. When you divide the population by the total electors, it looks like in California it takes about 677,000 votes per elector based on their population. Now, this is total population, not registered voters. So that's the first area where they misconstrue things. But even when you take the total population, 677,000 votes per elector in California. Wyoming, with its 3 electors, if you divide their population by 3, that's 187,875. So it takes about 190,000 votes in Wyoming to put an elector in the Electoral College, based on their math. Now, I'm not telling you their math is right, just based on their math. So 190,000 per elector in Wyoming, 677,000 per elector in California. Now, here's where the state comes in. 2 of those electors in each state represent the 2 senators from each state. So if you follow the Electoral College was set up just like Congress. You had an elector for each congressional representative and an elector for each senator. That way you got representation of both the people and the states in the Electoral College who elected the president. When you take the 2 statewide electors out, the numbers get a lot closer. When you divide California by 53 instead of 55, you come up with about 700,000 votes per elector. Versus Wyoming, with their 1 elector, once you take the 2 state electors out, is 563. So 563,000 to 702,000. That's a hell of a lot closer than 190 and 677.
So why are they misleading us?
Because they want democracy, not a republic, and they don't want states to have any sovereignty. They want it pure democracy, the will of the people.
Isn't that the way it should be?
Well, there's some that argue it should. Although, well, first of all, let's get back to this real quick and we'll get into that in a minute. So, they're misrepresenting the numbers based on a misunderstanding of the Electoral College, how it was designed, and why it was designed the way it was. Now, the other argument, there's the democracy versus the Electoral College. Mm-hmm. The other argument against the Electoral College is, I'll give you 3 guesses. It's
I'm not gonna
racist.
It's racist. Well, that always rears its head.
Now, bear in mind, the Electoral College was devised during the 1787 Constitutional Convention. Slavery was an issue.
Of course it was.
It was also devised, after the 3/5 Compromise, the Fugitive Slave Act. There's a lot of slavery-related issues that came into play during the writing of the Constitution, and obviously the crafting of the Electoral College.
Mm-hmm.
Most of those issues were ironed out in the construction of the House of Representatives and the Senate, so they were already in place when the Electoral College was devised based on the model of the House and the Senate. Now, one historian wrote that, let's see, where is it? He said, like many historians, I thought the evidence clearly showed the Electoral College arose from a calculated power play by the slaveholders. And that's the argument. Another historian basically makes that argument, and he says, as James Madison made clear in the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in Philadelphia, the big political divide in America was not between big and small states, it was between North and South, and was all about slavery. Now, he said some have argued that direct election was doomed because the Philadelphia delegates disdained for democracy. And the opposing historian says exactly that. He said that upon further and closer inspection, however, the case against the framers begins to unravel. First, the slaveholders did not need to invent the Electoral College to fend off direct popular election of the president. The convention, deeply suspicious of what one Virginian in another context called the, quote, fury of democracy, crushed the proposal for direct election on 2 separate occasions before it ever even got to the creation of the Electoral College. So they weren't big fans of democracy, hence the fact that democracy appears nowhere in our founding documents. Now, the historian who makes the case that it was based on slavery, yes, slavery played a role. Slave states did have concerns, but in the end, one of the biggest slave states, South Carolina, voted against the Electoral College initially. And in fact, under the initial apportionment of the House approved by the framers, slaveholding states would have held 39 out of the 92 electoral votes needed to win the presidency, or about 42%. So the North had a 58 to 42% advantage over the South, even with the Electoral College. Now, also bear in mind, there were still slaveholders in the North too, so that kind of balanced the scale.
Were there more people in the North versus the South, population-wise?
Well, the population, let's see, based on the 1790 census, about 41% of the nation's total white population lived in the same states. So their Electoral College representation, 39 out of 92, is about 42% of the Electoral College votes. Their actual white population was about 41% of the white population. So even with the 3/5 compromise, even with, trying to basically cobble this union together between abolitionist leaning states and slave states, the percentages still fell right in line with the Electoral College. So the founders weren't big fans of democracy. They were trying to cobble together colonies that had very diverse views on slavery.
Yep.
And they came up with a system that was representative of the states equally as states, as well as the populations, even when you factor in the 3/5 compromise for slaves and all that, it didn't really skew the numbers that much. Now, the historian who makes the case that, it was all based on slavery, it was racist, they were trying to accommodate the slave states, also goes on to say that today, of course, slavery no longer skews or stains the system. So, regardless of its roots, it's not an issue with our current incarnation of the Electoral College. While it was a North-South issue then, it's much more a big state, small state issue now, and still provides the same balance of state power to people power. And it forces presidents, or candidates for president, to treat all the states equally, because they need every vote, they need to win states, they need to accumulate Electoral College votes, so they have to cobble together a coalition of urban and rural, big state, small state, green energy versus oil. The president has to represent the whole nation.
But why do they talk about battleground states? I mean, why are some states more important than other states? Apparently.
Well, the importance of a battleground state comes directly from the people in the state. Certain states, obviously, California votes blue, Texas votes red,
Florida.
But some states, they're more purple. There's more independence. The people on the left may not be as zealous as the people on the right, or vice versa. So it's all about balancing the interests, and battleground states change periodically as their demographics change. So, people point to the battlegrounds and say, well, we know Texas is going to vote this way, and California is going to vote this way, and so-and-so is going to vote this way, but these 4 states decide the election. Those 4 states couldn't decide the election unless those other states who are true blue or dyed-in-the-wool red were true blue and dyed-in-the-wool red. You still have to get the same number of electoral votes to win. But, so, understanding the Electoral College, first of all, you have to understand the way our government was intended. A Federalist Constitutional Republic. Federalist in that the states have a say. Republic in that the people have a say through their representatives. And limited by the Constitution, which is where the Electoral College is, in the Constitution. Law of the land.
So that would, and I know this is a tangent, I'm only going to mention it just for a moment, but that would be the importance of having originalist, textualist Supreme Court justices.
Yes.
Because we need them to interpret what the founders intended, right? Not revision things, not look at it as what would they do today, but what did they do when they created it?
What was the intent? And on this particular issue, their intent may not be as relevant, because what they expected to happen with the creation of the Electoral College is not what happened. We have the Electoral College to thank for the end of slavery. We have the Electoral College to thank for women's suffrage. A lot of the advancements that came because of the Electoral College, because presidents had to apply or had to campaign to a very wide swath of the American people. So they had to take in a very eclectic view of the nation as a whole.
Right.
And the other main issue against the Electoral College is fairness. Fairness. Okay, that's a good question.
Yep.
When you're looking just at the Electoral College, it's easy to say it's not fair. When people use the California to Wyoming example and misrepresent it in the way that electors are meant to be allocated.
Yep. Well, you can see by those numbers.
Oh, yeah.
They're relatively close.
And that's the largest to the least extreme. Everything in between is much closer. So, now,
misrepresentation.
When it comes to fairness, they say, oh, well, Hillary won the popular vote. Al Gore won the popular vote. Okay. Is the popular vote fair? Is the Electoral College fair? That's the question of democracy. Let's talk fairness for a second. Again, going to California, it's the big player in the Electoral College. But California is also the big player in the House of Representatives.
Yep.
Is it fair that California has 53 members in the House of Representatives while there are 6 other states who only have 1 member? So anything that happens in the House, the California delegation carries a lot of sway. When was the last time you saw the congressman from Wyoming doing some big press conference? Do you even know who the congressman from Wyoming is?
No.
I'm sure people in Wyoming do, but we all know Nancy Pelosi. We know AOC. New York is another big player in the House. And of course, you see our Texas representatives from time to time.
Yep.
They're pretty big in the House too. Same with Florida. But the less populous states, you don't see or hear much from their representatives in the House because they represent relatively small populations, and quite frankly, they get outnumbered in the House, which is the Democratic branch of the government. You see how that works? See, already democracy in the House of Representatives is excluding a whole bunch of people. Now, it's not a whole bunch of people percentage-wise of the nation as a whole, but you're talking about 500,000 people in Wyoming who don't have a whole lot of say in what goes on in the House unless they band together with other people from bigger states and ride on their coattails of democracy, so to speak. So, the House is a prime example. Is it fair? Yes, because the House represents the people. Now, is it fair that both California and Wyoming each have 2 senators in the Senate? Again, you're talking about 37 million people in California, 500,000 people in Wyoming. Yet they each have equal representation in the Senate.
By design.
By design. And the Senate was specifically intended to cool the passions of democracy in the House.
Of the mob.
Exactly.
This is what our founders was trying to do.
I mean, Jefferson himself, what was his quote?
A democracy is nothing more than mob rule, where 51% of the people may take away the rights of the other 49.
And that happens all the time in the House. I mean, how many times have you heard, well, the House has passed a bill on this and the Senate won't take it up? Because it was a completely partisan bill that only reflected the views of the slimmest majority of the House. And again, the Senate, not meant to represent the people, meant to represent the states and to filter the passions of the people and their democracy in the House through the collective concerns at the state level. So, is it fair that each state has 2 senators? Yes. Yes, it's fair. Yes, that's the reason it was done that way. Because democracy is a very passionate and unfair exercise where the 51% can dominate the 49% unless you have another arbiter to balance the scales, which is what the Senate does. And, you know, fairness, when you look at it on the micro level, you know, just looking at the House or just looking at the Senate or just looking at the Electoral College, it's real easy to argue, well, that's not fair. But when you look at the macro, the big picture, what our government was actually designed to be, why it was designed to be that way, and why the Electoral College to elect the president is modeled after that design, it becomes a lot more fair.
Well, I mean, it was a separation of powers.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, our founders intended to keep those separations greater so they could cool the mob mentality and stop the mob from actually creating the changes that would destroy our constitutional republic. That was the intent. That's why there are separations of power.
You know, I watched a video on Amazon TV here recently. It's called Safeguard, Electoral College Story. And some of you may follow Tara Ross. I love Tara Ross. She does these daily history posts, and she's real big on the Electoral College. And in that little documentary on Amazon, she said that the founders created a government that trusted nobody. Nobody was supposed to have enough power to dominate anybody else. That's why they broke it up into the three branches, the executive, the judicial, and the legislative.
Yep.
That's why they separated powers between the federal and the state. That's why they have a Democratic House, basically a Federalist Senate, and then the Electoral College that combines those two to elect the executive. Nobody should be trusted in our government. Like Thomas Paine said, you know, government is but a necessary evil.
Absolutely.
And any decision you make, whether it be for a House representative, a senator, or a president, should be made with that in mind, because you're going to have a choice, and 9 times out of 10, well, actually probably 10 times out of 10, the choices are going to suck for somebody.
Well, it's like we say, and it's like it's always been said, how can you tell when a politician's lying?
Their lips are moving.
Their lips are moving. But we've told you, you need to determine what the lies were.
And it's not only that they lie, it's what they lie about.
Exactly. You need to know and determine, well, that lie really wasn't relevant, or this lie was deceptive in trying to change our constitutional republic.
So is I'm the best ever a lie? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Is it self-aggrandizing? Sure. Does it misrepresent anything of substance other than ego?
Boasting.
Now, a lie about the Electoral College and its fairness, or its founding, or its roots, or whatever. If you're lying about it to subvert it in order to advance your own agenda for democracy, is that more egregious to misrepresent the founding principles and ideals and intent, or to self-aggrandize?
Well, let me do a little question and answer here. I'm going to try and keep it brief. Where are laws created?
In the House.
In the House.
Yeah.
Where are they voted on?
In the House.
And then they go
To the Senate once they pass the House.
Then it needs to be signed by the president.
If it passes the Senate.
There you go. So, we have the House creating laws. They create them.
Based on
the representation of the people.
The democratic representation of the people.
All right. So, I'm going to use a for instance here. Where was Obamacare created?
In the House.
Was it?
Well.
That's the key. Did they lie to you about that? Because the House started it.
But they had to pass it to find out what's in it.
They had to send it over to a Supreme Court justice who rewrote it. Is that proper?
No.
Then it came back to the House for them to vote on it, and they voted on it, yay. Sent it up to the Senate. What happened?
The Senate voted on it.
Exactly, and the president signed it. That was a miscarriage of justice to our constitutional republic because it originated from a Supreme Court justice's hands. Well, not supposed to happen.
Well, you could argue that he didn't rewrite it so much as he interpreted the individual mandate as a tax rather than a penalty.
Which got it through the Senate.
Right.
The House couldn't do it. A judge did it, circumventing the process. Mm-hmm. That was wrong. And processes are there for a reason.
And that's the argument for an independent judiciary. You know, they're supposed to interpret law as written. That's the textualist, originalist. It's not the activist interpretation.
It's not a revisionist.
You know, just like people misrepresent the Electoral College, misrepresent our form of government as a democracy, they also misrepresent the balance of power, quote unquote, on the Supreme Court. The balance has been originalists, contextualists versus activist interpretationists. Not left-right. They qualify it as left-right. They throw that left-right out there, liberal-conservative, because people know those terms and can relate to them, but they don't know what it really means in the context of the court. You know, liberal justice is activist interpretationist. Conservative justice is originalist textualist. The entire Supreme Court should be originalist textualist.
Nonpartisan. Nonpartisan. Keep that in mind. Nonpartisan. You hear it all the time. It's not about being bipartisan. It's not about being partisan to one side or the other. We're talking justices who need to be nonpartisan completely. They should be thinking about how it was built.
And to be honest, the only way to actually have balance on the Supreme Court is to have a full court of originalist textualists.
Exactly. Now, that's a whole topic in and of itself. Can we wrap up the Electoral College? Because I know there's a lot more to this, but I can understand that there's a lot of people out there got the deer in headlight look. They're hearing a lot of information overload, and I get it. I do. Because, you know, the intricacies of the political system have escaped me for a long time.
And to sum up the Electoral College in a nutshell, it came from the same source as the Constitution, the Constitutional Convention, 1787. That time period had its issues, slavery, the whole 9 yards, but resulted in the freest country the world's ever known.
Absolutely.
Now, understanding the Electoral College comes down to three things. It's just like our nation, Federalist. It represents the states. That's why they each have 2 electors.
Right.
It's Republican. It represents the people through their electors. And it's constitutional. In other words, it's the law of the land.
Well, I think it comes down to, and I don't mean to interrupt because I know you love to talk, but it's like this, people, simplified. You have a nice old house, and it's starting to show its wear. Now, if you want to keep that old house, you have to do the updates, you have to fix things, you have to do remodels at times. Our government allows for that. That allows for remodeling and repainting and making things look better.
Hashtag amendment process.
Exactly. If you want a new building, tear that sucker down. Tear its foundation and everything and build a new building. That's the difference here. We don't want a new building. If you want a new building, then you need to find a place to build a new building. But this government, this people, we want this building. And all we want to do is fix and repair daily.
Mm-hmm.
We want that building built. If we have to build it bigger to house people, we'll build it bigger. But we're going to use the same construction for the foundation.
See, the problem is there has been some remodeling done.
A lot.
And it was done by piss poor contractors. I mean, you can go back to the 17th Amendment, where they took the senators away from the states. That was the beginning of the democratization of our republic. And then in the Electoral College context, states were given the power to decide how they would award their electors. And they found out fairly early on that if they went winner take all, then all of their electors went to the same candidate and they got more bang for their buck, so to speak. So, 17th Amendment, democratization of the Senate. Winner take all in the states, democratization of the Electoral College process. Now, the elimination of the Electoral College to fully democratize the presidency itself, and that's the end of our
Constitutional Republic.
Exactly.
You might as well tear it down and call us the Socialist States of America. I mean, really? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what they're talking about.
Hey,
that's what all of this discussion is about. Is it fair or unfair?
We're halfway there already.
You start removing some of these foundational pillars of this country, and man, we're a step away from that.
But that democratization of the Senate and the winner take all in the states for the electors, that's been incremental, and it has led up to the people misapplying the word democracy to our form of government.
Well,
misapplying it to the Electoral College, which is why they think the Electoral College is unfair or racist or whatever, because they've gotten this democracy drilled into their head over generations now, and people don't understand what it actually is, what it was meant to be, and why it worked the way it worked.
Well, let's look at it from a perspective like this, and I know it strays away from Electoral College in the main topic, but did our government, when it was infancy, coming out of a war, did it need money?
Oh, yeah.
Did they tax the incomes of the individuals?
No.
So it needed money, but it didn't tax the labor of the individual.
Right.
So that was later.
Right. Now, they did tax companies.
Sure.
They had excise taxes where companies paid a tax on everything they produced.
Okay.
It was a production tax, not a consumption tax, not an income tax.
Now, we're not going down that rabbit hole, though. We don't need to. We have established that they didn't tax our labors. Exactly. When they needed money building a country, they did that later.
Right.
Did we have needy people in 1776 when we declared our independence?
Oh, yeah. The founders talked about poverty quite a bit.
Did we have a welfare program?
Nope.
That the federal government funded?
Nope.
That came later.
That came later.
Another program that propped up socialism.
Mm-hmm.
And it came later than when the birth of our country actually happened.
Oh, much later. I mean, those things came around the beginning of the 20th century, after the democratization had begun.
Exactly.
Because, for example, the 17th Amendment was in 1912. Well, proposed in 1912, ratified in 1913. That democratized the Senate. I don't have it right in front of me when states started going down that winner-take-all path with the Electoral College, but I'm sure it was probably around that same time. So, with democratization came more government programs because the majority of the people wanted something, whether it was fair to all or not. The 51 ruled over the 49.
So our welfare dependency as an individual came later than the founders and our foundation.
Yep.
Even though there were needy people then, there was a need for money to pay off our war debt and begin a new country. And our founders didn't feel it was right to do those things. Why? Why would they feel the need to do them later?
Well, Ed, that's what I was trying to get at a while ago. Is these programs, these welfare programs, things like that, came about after the shift from the republic to a democracy.
Progressivism.
Right. And basically, the welfare state is buying voters in a democracy for people who will vote them more money. So,
and we've now come to this place where it is about money buying votes.
exactly.
And money is power. And we hear it all the time from the Democrats. Oh, we don't want to take away that money. Those evil Republicans want to take away your money. That's not true. That's an absolute lie. Now, should we cut back on our welfare dependency?
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you can work a job, you should be working a job. If you can pay the taxes to help pay and defray the cost, we should be paying the taxes. Does that mean that we should pay an income tax? I don't buy income tax. I'll buy on other forms of taxation to help build and support the infrastructure of a small federal government.
But, the income tax, not to mention it, came into play about the same time as the 17th Amendment in the 1912, 1913 time frame. So that was the rise of the progressives.
Yep.
And, it all comes down to one simple thing. Democracy was never the intent. Democracies never last. Democracies burn out as soon as people realize they can vote themselves benefits from the public coffers, which is exactly what has been happening for the last 100 years.
Well, I'm gonna quote this lady, and this is a pretty good quote. And PA 4th District, this is a rep you guys want. Okay, Kathy Barnett, a woman of color, no less. The results of a democratic socialist society are no different from a plain old socialist society. Sure, adding the word democratic may make people feel better about the idea of mob rule or elite control, but the outcomes are the same. Kathy Barnett. Yeah, those in Pennsylvania, that's the type of lady you need. That's the type of lady who needs to be representing your state.
I'd say one final thing before we close. The Electoral College only elects the president. So you have to pay attention not only to what your state is doing and how they run elections, how they are assigning electors, because the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is what it's called, has 15 states signed on to it, including Colorado, which is currently suspended but not removed, accounting for 196 of the 270 electors needed to win the election. And the idea behind the whole thing is once they get to that threshold of 270 electors, that compact kicks in and all of those states assign those 270 electors to the winner of the national popular vote. In other words, pure democracy elects the president, just like pure democracy now elects our senators. and pure democracy elects our House of Representatives, which is the only one that was ever intended to be that way.
And I know a lot of people on there, they'll look at European countries like Sweden, Denmark, and all those other countries that are socialists. They don't say that, but they are. And they'll try and compare things to our country. They were never built like our country. They don't have the heritage that the citizens of this country enjoy. The protections over natural rights. They don't enjoy those. Sure, they might have a socialized medicine and a program, but I know for a fact, being a Michigander, how many people came over from Canada to get medical treatment. And it wasn't because, medical treatment in the United States is so much better, although it is. It was because those treatments that they were needing weren't available in Canada, or the wait line for them for, I don't know, 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
They would die.
The dirty little secret that they never tell you about socialized medicine, everywhere in the world where it's practiced, socialized medicine, you don't get the latest and greatest medications. They're older, well-established, no longer patented medications usually. You don't get the latest and greatest treatments. They take time to develop, research and development. You don't get the latest and greatest medical equipment, But, this isn't about socialized medicine or socialism. It's about the dangers of democracy and how the Electoral College addresses those dangers. Everything about our system was set up to protect the minority from the majority.
Absolutely.
It was set up to cool the passions of the mob. It was set up so that things didn't change drastically, all herky-jerky, but went through a process that went through, it took time. It was messy. It was confrontational.
It was intended to take time. Everybody wants it now. They want it now, want it now, want it now.
And like I said, it was designed with the idea in mind that nobody in politics could be trusted.
It should have been. And that's what our founders intended.
Right.
You can tell that they guarded our liberty and freedom with eternal vigilance.
Now, that's not to say all of them thought that way. I mean, taking the Electoral College here, there were some founders who wanted to name George Washington king.
Yeah.
Now, that's...
And the mob would have went right along with that.
You had some that wanted to name him king. You had some that wanted direct democracy. And you had some that didn't trust anybody. And who, thank God, won out in the end. Who wanted separation of powers, something that was going to survive for the long haul.
Well,
because democracies inevitably burn out.
We're fortunate that George Washington wouldn't even think of it. We are fortunate, because if he'd have been that guy who said, heck yeah, I want to be king, he could have been crowned king, most likely. The population of our country at that time loved him.
And there is something to be said for the stability of a benevolent monarch.
Sure.
The problem is, it is a rare, very, 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 very rare individual who can take on that much power and remain benevolent.
So, yeah, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's absolutely one of those things that is very difficult to wield the power justly.
So in this election season, when people start talking about my popular vote and start dissing on the Electoral College,
shut them down!
Just let them know, states have a say in this, not just the people. It's the states. It's the states that created the federal government, created the presidency that we're electing someone to. So states have a say, people have a say, and in electing a president you don't want somebody who's only going to represent the interests of the majority, especially nowadays, considering the majority is high-density urban dwellers.
Well, the majority seems to be those that have attention deficit disorder. They want it now. This country wasn't designed for those with attention spans of a flea.
Actually, it's slightly shorter than a goldfish now, I believe, is what the scientists say. You know.
So we have an attention issue. We want it now issue. And our founders didn't build a constitutional republic for those people.
No.
So understand that with our short attention spans, today might be the day that's so important. But tomorrow, you might regret what you wanted today. You're going to have to start thinking about that instead of wanting it now all the time. There are some things that need a little extra time because it helps to curb the desires of a mob.
And there are some things that require more than just majority support. You know, if you get 6 out of 10 people to agree to something that directly harms the 4 people who disagree, that's not justice.
No.
So remember, states have a say in this, the people have a say in this, and the whole idea behind the Electoral College is to give us a president that has the broadest, not only people support, but state support, national support. You know, we have our say in the House. The states have their say in the Senate. We need a president who represents all of the above.
And that's basically the Electoral College. I'd love to say it was in a nutshell, but it's actually a bit more complicated to put it into a nutshell.
No, it's just a really big nut.
And we tried to crack it for you in as little time as we could. We hope that most of you followed the entire video to its end. If you didn't, I understand. Go back and break it down into pieces for yourself. Because that's what we have to do. We have to really look into why the founders did certain things and what they intended with their forward thinking.
And there's a lot of misinformation around it that has to be addressed. And you've got to recognize it as misinformation and then know how to counter it.
Yep. We're not saying that we know it all, because we don't. We're saying that we need to dig. All of us need to dig and research for ourselves and figure out what it is the politicians are lying about, and is it important to our constitutional republic and ultimately our liberties and freedoms. So, you know, like we always say, if you want peace,
prepare for war.
And knowledge is power. So guess what? It's on you. Learn.